This is a photograph from our family album, I guess. It's a photograph taken in the 80s when our children were very small, and Michael and Thelma invited us to visit them at the cottage in Avening. And of course it was a great occasion because Michael was a marvellous cook. He loved cooking and he loved having an impact with his cooking. So what he did that day was to cook a ham en croûte encased in pastry. When you broke the pastry, our names were picked out with cloves on the ham. So it was a wonderful surprise. It was typical of Michael in a way that he would turn a meal like that into a memorable occasion. I have some photographs of my children, who were very young then, gazing with amazement at who is this person.
I wondered if we could take this opportunity to say something about the relationship between you two over this long series of films, the relationship between the writer and the director. Because I think that's quite a mystery to many people, exactly how you worked, what the kind of relationship between you was. We're all very used to the notion of directors as the people who really put their signature on films. But you chose, uniquely, of all filmmakers, to sign your films written, produced, and directed by. You bequeathed endless confusion to critics and people writing about films and doing this. You once said the reason you did it was to keep other people out of interfering with the films, which I can well understand. How did it actually work as a relationship? You weren't the Archers quite at the point you made 49th Parallel, but you must have realized you were going to work together.
We had complete love and confidence in each other, and we were very lucky that just at that time we managed to prove to the man who had the money, and that was Rank, Arthur Rank, we managed to prove to him that he should let the filmmakers decide what they want to make. If you want to make a personal film, any one of you can do that. It doesn't cost so much now to hire lights, hire this, hire that, or buy this and that, and make your own film. But a big production, like 49th Parallel, which started as just a small idea and grew into a very big film, I don't think one man can do it.
And now let Papa try it.
That's Michael when he was just in his 20s. He's a young, aspiring filmmaker who was working with the Rex Ingram unit in Nice, and he got to do everything, including being an extra, including even being a kind of an actor. So Michael had a chance to work with the very best when he was a young man, and learn how to do everything, because there was a great spirit of everybody mucking in, and I think that really stood him in very good stead when he got back to Britain in 1930 after this very unusual apprenticeship. And that's great portrait. It's a self-portrait. That's another of the photos that Michael set the camera on the tripod, and then appears in the photograph. So it's a self-portrait taken in Tribeca during the making of King of Comedy, Scorsese's King of Comedy, because basically Michael became part of the group around Scorsese when he and Thelma Schoonmaker got together.
Martin, you've talked quite a lot over the years, and you've even been present at occasions like this in the past, introducing Michael and Emeric before their films in New York back in 1980. And I think what's interesting for the people who know your work is that you find so many points of contact between the Archers films and the films you're actually making now.
For me, it took me a long time to realize if there were any contacts in my films, that would compare or say, well, this came from the inspirations from a Powell Pressburger picture. So much so that eventually, when I got to know Michael well, I only met Emeric a few times, I think in 1978, 79, but I was very worried about seeing I Know Where I'm Going. And everybody was telling me, oh, you must see it, it's wonderful, and you must see it. And what I did, quite honestly, I was afraid to see it because I became friendly with Michael, and I felt that, what if I didn't like it? So eventually, going to ask me, you see. So I tried to worm my way out of it. But about 2 weeks before I started shooting Raging Bull, I decided I'd better look at it. I had a tape of it. And I was very overwhelmed by the film, mainly because I guess I've seen most pictures that have been made. A lot of many films. People really think I've seen a lot of films that have been made. But in other words, I was wondering if there was any picture that I missed in the past that really could be considered a masterpiece. In other words, a new film to enjoy, seriously enjoy. I didn't think I'd ever see another one in the past that had been made earlier. And this was it. This was it for me. I was fascinated by how romantic it was and how mystical it was.
Port Eric, 5:15 p.m. The motorboat from Killoran...
Emeric came up with I Know Where I'm Going, and it's really the most spontaneous of all their films, because it's a film that I think it came really from a dream, or certainly from an image that came into his mind of a woman who's trying to get to an island and she can't get there. And from that sort of germ cell, Emeric spun out a story of a woman who's quite hard, quite materialistic, thinks she knows where she's going, I know where I'm going, but actually is overtaken by, first of all, a romance.
Will you do something for me before I go away?
It depends.
I want you to kiss me.
Which happens to her because she can't get to where her wedding is supposed to take place. And really the film is all about not getting to where you think you're going. And that, in a way, is the story of a number of Powell and Pressburger's films. They're stories of interrupted journeys.
In 3 days, he falls in love with her and she is in love with him. But we never show the man because of whom she has come to these islands. Again, we think that, or we do, and as I repeat that I have never thought of that perhaps this film in 40 years' time, if we would have done something shown something between the two, this is
You mean this deliberate reticence?
Yes.
Really contributed a great deal to this. I think
she went to the islands to marry this rich man.
Don't tell them all the story.
That, I think, is one of the very last photographs of Emeric. And it's one I took when I visited him at his cottage, at Shoemaker's Cottage. I just had my camera with me and took a photograph of him, and he was showing me something on the table. And I've seen it turn up in many places. I think it's a photograph which captures Emeric rather well. It gives us a real kind of sense of his interiority, the way that one always felt there was an awful lot going on in Emeric's mind and his memory. He spoke rather deliberately, quite carefully, after thinking. And I think that photograph says something about his holding his tongue while he was thinking. Whereas Michael, of course, was always ebullient and a constant stream of witty remarks. Together, of course, they made an amazing team.
When Michael went into the cutting room to see the rushes the next day, then, of course, I had to be there. And I was there, and that's how it went on and on.
When I saw The Red Shoes, it was one of the great, a striking awareness of film at that time. I was 8 years old, I guess. And it was the first time I was aware of the Archer logo, the film of the Archers, and in color. I became obsessed with it. I became obsessed with the films.
So I'm fascinated. What was it about the Archers films that you felt was something like a Scorsese film?
Well, I'm not sure, but one thing I know is that when I saw the Archers films, I always liked the people. I was fascinated by the characters. Supposedly an antagonist like Lermontov in Red Shoes.
You cannot have it both ways. The dancer who relies upon the doubtful comforts of human love will never be a great dancer. Never.
Is it part of the writing, do you think?
Oh, I think so, yes. The dialogue and the conflict, the whole concept of it.
This is a very touching document because it's a list of productions that Michael was thinking, hoping to make. It's dated, work in progress, 1974-75, so this is in the second decade after Peeping Tom had in many ways fractured his career. But he was full of ideas, never stopped coming up with ideas. And they're extraordinary ideas. I mean, they're absolutely amazingly forward-looking plans. Cultural range was enormous. He had a huge amount of literature at his fingertips, as it were, and he was always coming up with ideas, often to produce versions of this, but it was very difficult to get backing. And it's very touching in a way, very sad to read some of these lists, wonderful lists in his immaculate handwriting, and just to imagine what some of these films might have been if he'd been able to make them. I mean, we're lucky that we have what we do have, but just imagine if he'd been able to make more films.
People are always asking us, first of all, how we got together, and then how we managed to work together for so long, something like 18 years, making about 20 films. The answer is love. You can't have a collaboration in anything without love.
When you invited me the first time, and you said something that you will find something which belong to you, I didn't know what he means. But for heaven's sake, his home was full with posters and our posters. A lot of other things.
Well, it's
about Powell and Pressburger. Couldn't believe it.